Oh yeah, let me take a drink then.
Yeah, I'm drinking lots of coffee.
I'm drinking tea.
Drinking lots of coffee, eating lots of red pills.
I'm drinking tea right now to be a little more yoted. I
All right,
figured
so
to talk about
this
ancient aliens, I should be high.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who do talk about ancient aliens are mandatorily high. So this is our first. This is our first episode of the YOTED podcast series, Through the Red Nation podcast. This isn't going to be a separate show. It's just going to be a series that we're going to do, kind of for entertainment, but also to combat a lot of the really vile conspiracy theories that are floating around in this, settler world called the United States, which itself is a conspiracy theory in many ways. But let me talk a little bit about the title of the podcast, because I don't want listeners to be confused. I don't want it to come off as offensive. But the word "yoted" comes from the term peyote, which is itself a medicine, right? And like all things medicinal, colonialism tends to turn these things into drugs. And so there's a saying in indigenous communities that can be both positive and negative when something is yoted, meaning that somebody maybe has abused or is a little bit out there, right, and has abused peyote, right? We know a lot of white folks who abuse peyote and come, like, as an indigenous person, oftentimes people will come to you with their dreams and their conspiracy theories.
That is my favorite thing, because I love to mess with them so much.
So I'll tell the story about the bad yoted, right? So we had a Red Deal get together here in Albuquerque when we first launched the program. And there was this white woman who looked kind of rugged, who was kind of like in and out of the crowd, looking specifically at me for whatever reason. And she looked like, she looked kind of rough. And after after the meeting ended, it was a really great meeting. We had we have over 100 people, like partners who helped draft the Red Deal show up. And, we were all hanging out and closing up our offices. And she approached me and says, "Hey, can I tell you something?" And I was like, "Oh no," like immediately in my mind, it was like alarm bells were going off. And it's a long story. I told it on an episode in the past, but the short of it is that she confessed to me that she had been taking peyote almost every single night for the last 6 months.
That is insane.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. And it looked like she had been. It looked like she had been taking peyote for the last 6 months.
She comes out and she's like, "I've been with Bigfoot."
Yeah. And so she told me that she is the reincarnation of Pechincha Lascawi, or the white buffalo calf woman.
No. Please.
And so then, like, I was like, okay. And I won't name names, but she dropped names that I was like, only somebody who knew people, from where I'm from up north would know, would be in because these names most people just don't know. And so she was dropping all these names of like medicine men and people that I knew who go to like ceremonies up there. And it's like the next morning.
Did you drop Robert Cross at all, or
what? No.
No. He's who named me, so I just don't want his name associated with it.
No, I don't want to name names. I don't want anybody associated with this yotedness. But so I called some people back home. I called my brother, and I was like, I described this woman to him, and he was like, okay, so she was this rugged white woman. Did she look like this? Did she have this? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, oh yeah. So one time I was cruising around with the old man, his a spiritual leader back home, and he kept complaining about this white woman, calling his house all the time. And they were driving through Rosebud at the gas and they stopped to get gas at the Mission gas station there. And there she was, like standing at the gas station, and she saw him, and she's like, "Hey, uncle, I need to tell you my vision." And the old man was like,
offering.
Yeah, no tobacco offering, just at a gas station. and he's like, "Son, get me the fuck out of here. Don't let that white woman touch me." So that's the story of being bad yoted, right? And we understand that internally, like within the Red Nation and in Native communities, we tend to use that in a way to, like, when somebody gets like out there in their beliefs in a bad way, right? Because she's definitely not the reincarnation of the white buffalo calf woman.
Yeah, I say that. I think we were saying this right before we started recording, like just in the psychedelic community, because like I used to be really into psychedelics when I was in high school before I was like, actually observant of like you shouldn't abuse drugs, stuff like that. I would we would call them acid brains because at like a certain point after you do so many psychedelics, it just sort of seems like your brain function starts to deteriorate if you don't take a break in between them. Like ideally, you shouldn't do acid more than once in a week if you're at all in another month. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there are people who like microdose,
Yeah,
to like
microdosing
level
is the best
themselves
way
out.
if you're actually trying to do some sort of spiritual thing, like how much spirituality is actually involved. I guess it sort of depends on what you personally believe, I guess. But a lot of new age people who really tie in today's subject fucking clearly did some acid.
Mhm.
And they have like these ideas of, they co opt Jewish symbols like the tree of life. And then, like, of course, what is it? Oh, no, not all is one, all are related. What is the actual word?
Mitakuye Oyase, or like we are all related.
Yeah, we are all related is often co-opted by the new age people and used just because Lakota is a very prevalent culture within settler culture. I argue it's probably one of the most prevalent just because you have uh, the crazy horse making Custer famous, and then that sort of becomes the battle cry of why we need to contain all natives. I mean, then you also have Geronimo and stuff like that, but the headdress is very like just a traditional Sioux headdress is often displayed when talking about indigenous people. Just in like even in like Pocahontas, they put her dad with acoustic, don't they?
Yeah.
Russell Means
Yeah.
character, which is
Yeah.
obviously like Russell probably requested that or something, but like
Yeah.
it's inaccurate to say the least. Not a
Well,
lot of people were insane enough to go, I'm going to go out to my enemy and touch him with this stick.
yeah. And so this series is really a response to, the things that you're talking about, like the new age culture just really co-opting indigenous culture and worldviews for their own weird settler conspiracies. But also, like, let's be honest, like some of, the QAnon phenomenon is taking hold. There are many QAnon followers. It's a conspiracy, and we'll get into this in one of the other episodes. But it's a conspiracy theory that has a cult following that's, built around President Donald Trump as somebody who's trying to expose this secret cabal of pedophile rings that are run primarily by Democratic leaders, such as Hillary Clinton. And the truth of the matter is that there is some truth to the fact that there are real pedophile rings among the ruling classes, of which Donald Trump allegedly is not immune himself, right? So we want to get into all of this, and we want the good kind of YOTED, the one that expands your brain, puts you on another psychic level, because we can't cede all the ground to the right, and the fascist right especially, and talking about the actual conspiracies that the ruling class uses to crush social movements, to crush indigenous people, to really, actually in this episode, to really like distort history, that indigenous people were just savages that couldn't do that couldn't build modern architecture and things like that. So we're going to get the good kind of YOTED on this podcast series.
We're gonna raise your frequency.
Yeah, we're gonna raise your frequency. Cue the music. So today we're joined by Zitkato, who is the host of the Bands of Turtle Island podcast, which has been going. You have about 10 episodes now, but has been going steady. It's a really great podcast. Just did a crossover episode. Hopefully, you'll be joining us more in this series. But I'll let you introduce yourself and maybe introduce the topic at hand today.
Pluralism. I'm Oglala Lakota from Pine Ridge, Porcupine to be exact. I don't live there anymore, so I don't really, you can't dox me. Uh, but I go by Zitkato, which is just Bluebird. Feel free to call me that if it's easier. Uh, and also Wolf was my former alias, and then I learned that everybody uses Wolf as an alias who's native. What Bands of Turtle Island is like I started it to sort of tell the history of the American Indian movement, and then Jacobin sort of bought me out for my
Wow.
story, and so I said,
The
well, I guess
truth.
I won't finish this story on here, but I'll do preliminary episodes like the 20 points interview we did together for Indigenous Peoples Day, and I just think it's important that the story of AIM gets told as like a influential militant decolonial organization. It's not necessarily revolutionary, but it definitely has a lot of applications to Marxist strategy today, especially from the indigenous point of view, as well as they have great foundational documents for how indigenous people are viewed worldwide now, globally. And so I think why I got into Ancient Aliens was like, I don't know, I was probably in like sixth grade or something like that. And my dad brought me up there because they were talking about Native Americans, and my dad's white, so he always wanted me to be sort of exposed to my culture in some way, because that was sort of like when they got married, the traditional Lakota way, like wrapped in the blanket and stuff. Um, he was told like it's your job to teach your son how to be a Lakota man, because you don't live you don't live on the reservation. There's nobody else to teach him, so you have to learn this stuff. And so I learned some basic things like tobacco ties and things like that, just how to pray, songs, and like minor parts of the language, like how to say animal names like Mimila, Tatanka, and stuff like that. Just like easy words, emu, cat, shunka, dog. Named a lot of dogs. Shunka is
Yeah.
the most generic.
The other name of a dog, the most common name on a Lakota family is also Wohumpy, which means soup.
Ooh, that was good. I like dog jokes; those are funny. But I taught my roommate that. He's white and he loves making dog jokes now. And I'm like, I don't know if I should have taught you that. But I don't know. It's a little bit fun for me just because I'm used to the like microaggression, if you could want to name it that or whatever. But it's just like you have to live with some racism if you're native in a settler colonial society. It's kind of annoying, but
And one thing that you just brought up is that like we're not just gonna like take apart these conspiracy theories from an indigenous perspective, but we're also gonna do it from a materialist perspective as well, and from a left perspective and an anti-imperialist perspective. And I think the show notes that you provided me on this wonderful topic of ancient aliens really hits all of those checks all of those boxes.
it's
So
really a weird episode. So if you all aren't ready to hear some crazy stuff, I'm going to sound insane, but I have sources, I swear. They'll be in the show notes. I'm not going to go very in depth with my citations, but you could go watch these things yourself, and I'll provide my sources to counter reference them. And really, what I'm doing is providing a more plausible conspiracy theory. So it's not something you can necessarily prove, but I'm just saying if there is
but
a
you
conspiracy,
can't disprove it. That's the point.
so rather than saying, I'm right in what I'm saying that I'm offering you a better narrative to counter-react conspiracy theorists because they don't respond to truth. Okay, you could just simply say there are no aliens, blah 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 blah. But instead, offering them another conspiracy theory to latch onto is a better way to start bringing them leftwards if they're not too far into the QAnon realm. You know what I mean? Because we will touch on QAnon in this episode, just because I'm pretty sure I know who some people think Q is, at least in the ufology community. Allegedly. But like, if there's anybody I'm convinced is Q, it's this guy. So we'll get into that. But Ancient Aliens is just sort of like a pet thing of mine that I watched and I was like, well, that doesn't seem right. Because at that time I have studied enough like history to know that the land bridge theory is pretty much plase, is that the French term? I don't know. Like, it's not really something that people are like, yeah, they walked over a land bridge. No, they canoed along the coast or they sailed like the Maori. There's no reason that's not plausible because it's been proven that it is possible. And plus, we know that they're probably
Easter
the ones
Island.
Easter Island.
Easter Island is a colony of Maori people who set up shop there. And so there's like a variety of like indigenous like migration stories or origin stories, that don't just come from and the other thing too is that like there's this kind of ingrained like xenophobia, I guess, within those things, to say that like, oh well, you are you're Asian or something like that, or anti-Asian sentiment. But that's a whole nother story. Let's jump right into this and talk about Ancient Aliens, specifically the History Channel series, which I think a lot of people have seen, unfortunately, or they've seen memes of.
Yeah, usually everybody knows his name's Giorgio Tsoukalos. Nobody knows his name, but his name's Giorgio Tsoukalos. He's the guy with the hair that's aliens. Everybody knows that meme. It's like what, an old 2008 meme? It's very old. It's from my middle school days, so that's all I remember. Ooh, I'm about to burp. Hold on. Excuse me. We'll edit that out. So Ancient Aliens is like 15 seasons long. It's a docu-series that started on 4/20 in 2010, which I think is, they knew what they were doing.
There's a little Easter egg there. Yeah. That's Hitler's birthday.
Oh, no, you just brought that. I didn't think it was a Nazi thing. I thought it was like stoners would watch those. No. Oh, no, it's totally a Nazi thing. But it attempts to explain the great mysteries, quote unquote, of history via the evasive answer aliens. So basically what I mean by that is whenever there's a question, it's usually aliens. All right. So the series is heavily based on Eric von Daniken, Daniken's book Chariot of the Gods, which Carl Sagan rips apart, if you want to go look up that review. But after he did time in an Egyptian prison for embezzlement and fraud. Okay, so that's who we're dealing with, is a fraud. When he gets out, he's like looking around, for a publishing house, and nobody wanted to do it because it's like, you're an idiot. Like, we have some ideas, and they're definitely not aliens on how they did these things. So he finally finds this publishing house willing to do the book, but it's on two conditions. One, he only gets 7% of the profits. And then two, a ghostwriter under the pseudonym Wilhelm Rodersdorf would write the book, who his real name was Utz Udermann, and he was a Nazi smuggled out of Germany after the war through Project Paperclip along with the scientists.
Yeah, Operation Paperclip. Can you talk about that? Because a lot of people may not know what that means.
So, Operation Paperclip is at the end of at World War II, the Soviet Union was pretty indiscriminately executing Nazis. Some of them did get to go off,
as they should have.
Yeah, some of them got to go to Serbia and do science gulags to do work for the Soviet Union if they didn't have anything directly to do with the concentration camps. But for the most part, most Nazis were summarily executed, if not thrown into prison until they were worked to death, And I think we could all agree that's fairly reasonable, So, not to make light of what happened in the gulags, it was arguably pretty bad as far as for the Nazi conditions, but not all gulags were the worst gulags. You actually have to look into these systems to actually know what's going on. Like the science gulags, the Nazi scientists really had it made as far as prisoners are concerned, especially when you consider it compared to the U.S. prison system.
But also the space program, the NASA space program, was only
it was ran by Werner von Braun. Yeah,
he
was an SS member. An SS member. He definitely knew what the concentration camps were. Yeah. Everybody in the SS knew. But funny enough, I actually was watching Cosmos, expecting to hate it completely, the newest season. And Neil deGrasse Tyson talks about the scientists who basically made up a bunch of shit to trick the Nazis. And I want to look into it more. I wish I knew about this beforehand. But I think he might have something to do with why they believe this stuff. Which scares me, but he did it because he was Jewish and he was like, you know what, fuck these guys, I'm gonna waste their time. Uh, but so Paperclip, we smuggled out a bunch of different people, and then West Germany ends up being ran by Nazis immediately after World War II. So the Nazis never lost power in Germany; they really didn't, which is terrifying to me. And as well as the CIA brought over Nazi propagandists all the time.
They just became social democrats.
They just became social democrats. Exactly. It's really upholding German tradition.
Yeah.
It's clear that this theory likes to dip its toe to anti-Semitic tropes, and it often participates in almost deification of Nazi scientists as this key holders to alien civilization, such as like this project that's called Die Glocke, which was supposedly a UFO captured by Nazi scientists and research, and Werner von Braun was the head of that operation.
Wow.
I'd like to think that Werner von Braun lied to the CIA on why he should be smuggled out of Germany.
Wow.
That's what I think happened. But yeah, so it's really interesting how much this ancient aliens community is tied into a lot of Nazism. It is crazy. And so, all in all, the show has produced some of the most enlightening, using the word loosely,
in large scare quotes, enlightening
pieces of evidence, all while having the most incredible set of interview guests. Not only has this series done wonders for the ufologist community, wonders again in scare quotes,
wonders,
but for the conspiracy genre in general, as more and more independent reporters join the field. I remember all so clearly becoming acquainted with this show with my father, who is an Alex Jones type. That's why he really liked it. Okay.
Oof.
Yeah, it's really annoying. And so I had to sit there and debunk everything in order to be like, that you're insane. You're going insane. Please don't talk to me about this. You're freaking me out. And so the first episode I watched was season 7, episode 7, Aliens and Insects. And this episode centered on the idea of ancient ant-men, beetles buried with mummies, and swarms of locusts.
We're not talking about the Bible.
Well,
actually, maybe in parts.
We could, but I try to leave those ones out. Yeah. But in ancient insect worship's connections to aliens. That's the overall thing, is that it's this often a trope in anthropology that's rooted in pure Orientalism, that anytime you see iconography repeatedly throughout a culture, they're automatically worshiping it. And that's not necessarily true, though in some cases it is. And when it's like supported, like in regards to the scarab in Egyptian culture, they did worship it. But not all the time is like a thing that they see every day, something they worship. You know what I mean? It's just like it's an everyday thing, and they're trying to explain it through oral history. And white people are like, "Oh no, that's a god to them. That there's a tree god behind that they're actually describing." It's like, no, they're talking about the pine trees and just using nation as a poetic device almost. You know what I mean? Like especially with like when we talk about making a treaty with the Buffalo Nation, we didn't write a fucking treaty with the fucking buffalo.
Yeah.
You know, we're explaining how the natural process of the natural process of nature of the world, you know, is based on at least on the Great Plains, indigenous people culling the numbers of buffalo. Right. It's the only way you don't have overpopulation, is that there's a predator that takes them out, and wolf packs aren't really going into herds of buffalo and taking out large numbers, you know?
Yeah. And like, I guess the symbolism of the buffalo in like Lakota culture specifically is tied to the idea of creating a covenant and a compact, right? Which is tied to, you know, going back to Te Saint-Louis, the white buffalo calf woman. She was the one who like, I don't think she brought the pipe, but she definitely like created like the ceremonies, or helped solidify the ceremonies and the kind of the vows and the covenant that one would take on a pipe when making an agreement. And specifically amongst indigenous human beings, or human beings in general, we weren't called indigenous back then, but amongst human nations as well as non-human nations such as the Buffalo Nation.
And so this episode begins, speaking of Egypt, it begins talking about the scarabs and real scientific biology that was discovered in 2013. And this article suggests that they follow the stars when determining where to roll their dung balls filled with eggs. And a lot of people probably don't even realize the methods being deployed here. And even if you can identify them, discerning whether or not it is malicious becomes an even greater challenge. Like this idea that these people are worshiping this rather than it just being them explaining science.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because Egypt was very focused on science and used religion as a way to try to explain how they thought the world was working. Religion and science was almost synonymous. You know, it wasn't necessarily the same idea we get with Christian domination of society. You know, and so a lot of the immediate next lines of the. Okay, so the immediate next lines of the show is dismissing the possibility of any advanced biological observations in Egypt. To me, the fact the show would so immediately hand wave the advanced science of their society is a clear example of Orientalism, which if nobody has read the book by Edward Said, you only have to read the 35-page introduction. But
yeah,
literally,
listen to East as a podcast. He's done
even better.
Yeah, it's seen as the editor. He's actually listening right now.
Hello there.
He's our god. He's our sky genie.
Yeah. And ultimately either subconscious or overly ludicrous white supremacy of the show. This claim that the Egyptians didn't know the scarabs followed the stars seems to be immediately contradicted, as the show points out that the Egyptians worshipped them for, as the show puts it, inexplicably no reason. If you see an animal that seems to have the same knowledge of the stars as you do, you might draw a connection between you and it, right? That might be where you even got the idea of, oh, maybe we should use the stars to sort of guide us. You know, there's a lot of ways this idea could have come up in Egyptian culture, and I'm just spitballing here because these are way more plausible than they just, for no reason, started worshiping a scarab, because Ancient Aliens doesn't think there's actually no reason.
And to be clear, like, a lot of cultures had vast, complicated, you know, star knowledge, like in depth, like Lakota star knowledge. Like, I think probably the most advanced navigational star knowledge came from like the Pacific cultures, who, you know, navigated vast bodies of the ocean and understood if they were in different parts of the world, the stars would look differently, and like reoriented their maps accordingly. So this isn't, you know, something that's like unique. It's you know, how do you think they traverse this vast body of water without just dying at sea?
And so I think the Egyptians revered the scarab because, as you can see in their pyramids, they saw stars as a symbol of progression, and is why they designed the pyramids to go so along with Orion's belt, 3 prominent stars going not so bright to brightest to Betelgeuse. And so it's almost like a conceptual monument to progress of the civilization. And so the reason why I think this is because Khepri is linked, Khepri, the scarab god of Egypt, is linked to development, creation, and is seen as one of I think 3 parts. Don't call me on that. I don't know a lot about Egyptian.
My brother knows all of this stuff. So,
but
I'll ask
Khepri is seen as part of the sun god Ra, along with several other of their gods, and of course, Ancient Aliens talks about them. But we'll have to talk about those in another episode. But Khepri is directly related to development and creation. So to have the same concepts displayed by the dung beetle, also displayed by the Great Pyramids, arguably one of the greatest achievements of the Egyptian civilization, just because it lasts through all time, you know, whatever. It makes sure you know they existed and gives you a little reason to look into them, right? That symbolizes progress through their vast knowledge of the stars. And like we were saying, this is common in many cultures, is that they revere astronomy, not astrology. They revere astronomy. And they often depict
astrology is a science too, okay?
Yeah, I love astrology. Whether my theory is correct or not, I don't know. I'm not an Egyptologist. But this was an alternative theory I was able to form with minor anthropology training, just because I used to live with a guy who had a master's in anthropology. And like he taught me how to do some stuff and research some things. And that's how I got into this academic thing. But the show continues on explaining that Egyptians thought the sun was moved by Khepri. Instead, I would say their oral teaching utilized the scarab metaphor to convey the idea of solar orbiting. Okay. A ball going around following a star. Like a dung beetle does. And then as if on cue, the show dives right down into the deep end without warning, claiming that the Egyptians saw Khepri as a pilot to an ancient spaceship. And then using the pilot angle to draw you into the spaceship idea, no matter how far they have to stretch. The producers at Prometheus Entertainment do their best at misrepresenting half-truths, because there is some truth to what they're doing. And based on the idea that pantheons of gods were just hodgepodge crews of various alien species from the ancient Federation of Planets and the exploration project called Ancient Starfleet. To me, it's clear that the show took influence from Star Trek in all of the wrong ways. And as the show barely continues explaining the scarab's importance and burial, the narrative quickly changes to the idea that it isn't a real biological scarab, but rather it is an interdimensional, interplanetary reincarnation device. I don't really know what to call it, but that was it was inspired directly by Khepri, the insect pilot of the SS Ancient Enterprise. This device would transfer your soul body to body via mummification, or as David Childress, one of their guests, says, a cocoon like the aliens used. The episode then turns towards an observation of metamorphosis, and then moves into onto a Cambridge study of the insect Issus, a mechanical-like mechanism that allows it to move in sync. My assumption is they don't realize that most human inventions are inspired by what we observed in nature.
So, just to kind of interject really quickly, like as you were talking about these things, I was thinking about the band Journey, and if you Google,
what a connection!
Well, no, like look at their album covers; they all have the scarab flying through space. Like
you're right.
So, like it was like, dude, they're totally red pilled. Like
they're totally ancient alien conspiracy theories. But next to the episode comes the ant people narrative. And first, like normal, the show begins. Oh, actually, it's its own episode, kind of. But they have 2 episodes. The show kind of covers it, but there's a bigger episode to it. And first, like normal, the show begins with a biological extravaganza of ants and their incredible ability to act as a unit. They definitely exhibit a hive mind feature using pheromones in order to sort of direct mass movement without actually having to communicate with sounds. So it's a very advanced way of communicating it biologically. And of course, humans would recognize this. And this is likened to the Greek Myrmidon soldiers. I don't really know how to describe, pronounce it, but it's described in the Iliad. And they were the soldiers led by Achilles. And already the story lends itself to supernatural explanation, with Achilles being involved. And so the story Ancient Aliens presents is that of a king who pleads with Zeus to repopulate his plague-swept kingdom. And so after he dreams of ants falling from a tree and turning to men. And obviously the conclusion is that Zeus is a genetic scientist.
Duh.
They revisit several times throughout the series that splice humans and ants together, and thus the similarities between species can be explained simply with alien gene splicing. And this is the soldiers acted as a unit and were armored like ants. So almost like they're just describing how ants work.
So you're just like, you just described the plot to Aliens. Like that's actually like the entire Alien series is about splicing human genes with
Oh yeah, Prometheus and stuff.
Yeah.
I watched that once.
Yes. So this is the series of the Alien series that what's his name, Ridley Scott directed. So
But so this serves as a great transition into the Native American legends portion of the episode, which is what primarily brought my interest to its peak as a young, impressionable Oglala boy. You know, the show talks about Hopi legends of ant people, or the Anasazi. Uh, we know who they were, emerging from subterranean living quarters where they had survived through the Ice Age. This couples with Lakota myths of different ant people, not at all the same myth, nowhere close to the same explanation, who would build burial mounds, okay, that we can still see today. And so these ant people, however, did not pioneer their way of living, but instead were taught by real-life ant-like aliens. So they just immediately deep dive. Every single time, that's how it starts. It starts off with real things and then deep dives into the alien stuff. But they live underground in inner Earth. And so my favorite piece in this episode, however, is when David Wilcock, the literal incarnation of Ra, I'll get you guys the audio for that, where he says it himself in voice, says that ants are the original depiction of grays. The ant people are the grays, okay? All in all, the tendency of Ancient Aliens is to explain away indigenous people using aliens as the motor of mental genocide, which I sort of took from the vein of Deloria Jr.'s Genocide of the Mind to describe the idea that all the real Indians had died. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And so in the mind of the masses, indigenous people are considered uneducated savages who sometimes still exist, but are too helpless to do things themselves and live off the government and stuff like that. And in the same vein, Ancient Aliens seeks to not understand indigenous people, but to present them as if they couldn't possibly achieve these feats without the help of ancient astronauts. The Ant People story was really first told in Season 2, Episode 4, Underground Aliens, which is heavily laden with indigenous American legends. Excuse me, I've had the hiccups. As well as interesting representation of Sumerian legends. There, in the episode, they interview two Navajo men, one of whom discusses the validity of the Bering land bridge migration theory. And this land bridge theory was designed to explain the similarities in skull structure of indigenous Americans and different Asian people.
Nothing like throwing in a little chronology and phrenology in there.
Yeah, thank you. I can touch every racist topic with this episode. It's great. I've even heard people say that the reason Lakota is a phonetic language, like Japanese is a phonetic language, is because of the land bearing. And I do not have any reason to dispute that language could have been influenced from ancestors who migrated via canoe to the coast or across vast swaths of ocean. However, I do take issue with that. I do not think that Lakota people are some long-lost Japanese nomadic people like the straw man I made would think. You know, I'm not saying anybody directly thinks this exact theory of all of them conglomerated, but these people definitely think along these lines. And altogether, if you're to piece together their many ideas of how aliens exist, this is what you come to. And a lot of it is super racist. It gets into Mormonism and shit like that. So it's just a whole mess. All right. So once again, Ancient Aliens grounds their narrative in half-truths, discussing the fact that many cultures have stories where they refer to an ant people. And similar to the falsehood that Cortez was thought to be Quetzalcoatl, returned, it is due to the blurred lines of stories come in contact with, I think deliberately, you know.
And this is the plot line for Apocalypto, right?
Yeah, almost, yeah.
Yeah, so like every single thing that you've pointed out has become some kind of popular U.S. like movie plot line.
Yeah, and so this is part of why I think Ancient Aliens is really a CIA psyop, because when they bring in these Nazi propagandists, not even a decade later, you get Roswell.
Right.
You know, and it only makes sense, like, not to sound insane, that if Ancient Aliens is some sort of conspiracy theory, it is instead the conspiracy theory that the CIA is using Nazi propagandists and the UFO phenomenon in order to trick the American public into accepting more white supremacist ideas.
Right. I think that's a plausible cultural phenomenon, like just because the most people get their quote unquote edutainment right from edutainment. That's a
from
word.
Edge of Wonder.
Yeah, I mean, like they get it from like watching Apocalypto or watching Pocahontas or watching Ancient Aliens, and these films and this entertainment isn't promoting itself as educational. Well, maybe, I don't know, maybe Apocalypto is, but it's nonetheless being accepted as a truth, right? And the idea that like, the I'll just talk about Apocalypto. Apocalypto's, it follows the story of Jaguar Paw, who is an enslaved, person from a minor tribe next to the Nahuatl Aztec, right, who are dominating the region and using these people as like human sacrifices. And so the trope is that like, look, they were constantly at war. They couldn't even, the Aztec Empire was in decline, and it had to like rely on like this really brutal form of exploitation of slave labor from these other tribes. And of course, and I'm going to ruin it because you shouldn't watch the movie anyways. But you should watch it. But
it's okay. It's like entertaining. I guess,
yeah,
but.
Yeah. It's
It's not real.
Yes, but it's not real. That's the point. And he at the end, like they escape, and his partner has a child on the run in this really wild scene. But they see at the end of the movie, they see the Spanish ships coming to what I believe is like the Yucatan Peninsula, which is actually funny because the Yucatan actually means it's like just a word that says like what are you saying or something like that in the indigenous language.
What are you saying?
Yeah, what are you saying? Or like what do you want or something like that. And so the end is like they're saved, basically. The salvation, the prophecy is
from the Spanish. I don't remember it ending that way. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so the Spanish come at the end, and you just see them off in the distance. They don't really come to shore, but it's it's like signaling that on one hand the colonizers are like the imperialist Aztecs, which they were an empire for very, for all intents and purposes, but not like a capitalist empire, right? But
or not even like European empires. Honestly, even their form of warfare is much more nuanced than people would believe. It's similar to how Lakota had the coup stick, is that their goal wasn't to murder as many people as possible. It was to beat each other in combat. Which you don't need to murder one another to do.
And there was like a whip man who, from our tribe, the Kluichasha, his name was Plays With Them. And his name came from the fact that he never killed an enemy, because he would just go out and like play with them. He would just like, he would like knock them off their horse or trip them and embarrass them. And that was much more of a defeat than, and he was considered the top warrior, and he never killed anybody. So
I will suggest the book Fifth Son. I can't remember who the author is, but it's a really good book that dispels a lot of these like misconceptions of how the so-called Aztec Empire operated. And like even like with the religious sacrifices, it was more of a position of honor within the society that you were already a pre-designated sacrifice option in case of times of war. And the two sides would agree on how many sacrifices each would get. And the reason why everybody started to hate the Aztecs was that they used their power to start saying, well, you need to give us more sacrifices so we don't need to go to war as often. So that's where it starts to come from, is that you do start to see exploitation come up, but it's in a much more nuanced way than they're just obtaining slaves from nations that they're just making into, I guess, wards.
Yeah. It also doesn't like romanticize it either. It's not to say
exactly
what they were doing was right, but it's not just a complete copy
nuance
of like
exactly.
Yeah, it's the only time the word nuance is okay.
Literally, it's like, well, you need to understand why these people were sacrificing people to gods.
Yeah.
Okay. Like you need to understand that. You can't just go, oh, it's savage. Like, of course, it's not something we look on favorably today.
But they weren't also leading crusades, right, against like like what was happening in Europe at the time. And in fact, many of these places, and this gets it back to the episode itself, is many of these places were actually larger than most European cities and had much more canal systems, taxation systems.
They had aqueducts that the Spanish would destroy. So that's why you can't see them today.
They had like there was like an emerging kind of class-based society as well. You had like professional priests, you had like lawyers, you had, you know, scientists, you had people who were considered, you know, like an emerging kind of like middle class, you know, but also you had like leaders who, many of whom were, it was what do you call it, like hereditary, right? And so
Yeah.
there was like hierarchy, and it's not to like valorize them and say that there wasn't any hierarchy or there wasn't any social conflict. You know, if you're a Marxist, like the entire history is all of history is you know, moved forward by class conflict, and we never had the opportunity to work out that class conflict because we were invaded. You know.
Well, I see, and I think that's kind of interesting because, like, they did study the Iroquois Federation and the I don't remember the actual
Haudenosaunee.
Haudenosaunee. Okay, so they actually did study them, and I would think it was either the second or third release of the manifesto. Engels put in an edit specifying written history as a nod to certain oral societies having a lack of class conflict. Not that they didn't have class of conflict, but that they had mostly figured out a way to work within the class.
Mm-hmm.
Not really class collaborationism, but more like it wasn't exploitative necessarily.
Yeah. And that's an entirely different episode.
Literally. Like we've set on the table so many episodes now. This is a series. Yeah. So, but the Lakota, yeah, right. So the Lakota, similarly to the Navajo, talk about people coming from underground, but about ourselves with Wind Cave. Mm-hmm. But the Lakota, similarly to the Navajo, talk about coming from a cave, and we're talking specifically about Wind Cave, where I think it's Window Cave for the Navajo. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Oh,
I'm not really sure.
I would say, well, there's Window Rock, but that's not
Window Rock. That's not really a creation.
It's not the same. Some people, yeah. As an in-law, I won't comment more other than to say it's debated.
It's debated. Okay. Yeah, I'm not totally sure because like we only like ever lived on the Navajo Nation. We never really. The story is very much. I think with Wind Cave, you could actually like look at it as since there's always wind coming through there, it makes sense that it was an oxygenated cave that you could live through an ice age with primitive underground growing techniques, but it wouldn't be very efficient. So I'm not really sure how that story actually translates to real history. Well, but I could believe that part of the ice age was lived in the cave.
Well, I would say that like if you know anything about like Wind Cave, there are these rock formations that appear only in Wind Cave itself. Like they're these like they're called like bauxite formations. But also there's a huge underground reservoir underneath Wind Cave that has some of the most primitive forms of primitive life forms that they believe that single cell organisms evolved from. They're like prior to cell organism. Yeah. So how
did we get that knowledge? DNA databanks from aliens.
Yeah. I mean, so in some ways, like they, you know, like feel like even like in a really kind of broad interpretation, metaphorically, you can think of Wind Cave as being the origin of life in the sense that it has like the necessities. It has, you know, air, water, heat source, a light source, all of those kinds of things. But then also this underground, like these organisms, they're not even, I think I can't remember what they call them. They call them, they call them extremophiles, meaning that they live 100% without light. And so they grow in these like really adverse conditions, but the scientists have like really concluded that like these extremophiles are like the very primitive forms of life as itself. Like we're basically looking at the past, like when single cell, like the moment before single cell organisms became a thing, you know, as we know it today, this is what they look like. And so there is some truth to that, you know, and even the Lakota creation story is very much similar to like the Big Bang, you know, because it starts off as Eon, which is the rock, which is matter, right? And then basically explodes into, because there was nothing at first, then it explodes into, you know, creating the world with mini or water. And then there was, you know, the sky, ska, and then, you know, all of the other elements that came after that, the sun, but the creation story, it actually, like, when it's told correctly, which I didn't tell it correctly just now. If you've listened to the Big Bang Theory, it's very similar. Yeah.
Yeah, I could never tell. Like, it's very impressive to hear like a medicine man talk about it.
Yeah.
Like, that's where you would want to go to actually hear a lot of these oral histories.
Yeah, and it's, like I think the main element, the first thing before there was anything was taku skanshkan, that which moves, right? And like that's like the first thing. And but if you don't know the language either, it doesn't really translate that well in English.
Yeah, exactly. And even like the Great Mystery, like Tokashila, we're not saying a god, we're saying we don't fucking know. You know what I mean? We're not personifying God. It is its own thing, and you shouldn't. Why does God need to be a person? Mm-hmm. That's what I've never understood. I know it's easier to conceptualize, but I don't think even the only thing similar is that like the ancestors are sort of the voice of the Great Mystery or whatever, like with the thunder bringing the messages or whatever. And so like I think there's a lot of like acknowledgement of that, like when you die, that your energy goes back into the universe or whatever, and that you are part of the Great Mystery at that point. I don't know. I've looked into it and tried to apply it to real science now, like the actual oral histories, and I think you could really make an argument that it makes a good conception of how energy and matter formed and work today. Mm-hmm. And so, where were we in these notes? Going back to the Nazi who wrote Eric, that was a perfect place to veer off in these notes. Let's go back to the Nazi. Let's go back to the Nazi who wrote Eric von Daniken's book. It can be assumed he helped Eric, if not completely, write his other books, like Gold of the Gods and Gods from Outer Space. And in Gold of the Gods, he claimed plates were found in a secret underground library in the Yucatan. And I think it's in the Yucatan. I'm not really sure. But he was filled with artifacts that he admits to slightly embellishing what they were, although definitely seeing it himself. So 4 years later, admitting more that he made the entire story up, and the artifacts found were actually made of bronze.
Dang.
Yeah, this guy's just a liar through and through, left and right. And so I'd be more than happy to talk about Ancient Aliens by Prometheus Entertainment more. But I think it is more representative of a larger phenomenon. And of course, influenced by ufology, quote unquote. Yeah. I like saying ufology because it makes it sound like a real science, but it is not. And one of the more popular circulating YouTube channels in the UFO community was Project Camelot. And since its inception, Project Camelot has become a leader. This is directly from their website. Has become a leader in the area of whistleblower testimony by providing filmed interviews shot guerrilla style on location with key witnesses and researchers from all around the world. We have traveled to remote corners of the globe and revealed secrets in areas previously only known to a select few, from secret societies and those with high-level security clearance in the secret governments.
A lot of secrets.
A lot of secrets.
A lot of secrets. It's like they use the word secret 3 times in that sentence.
That's how you know it's true. It's like a secret Technical Institute University or whatever that ITU Institute of Technical University or something like that. But fucking, it's exactly like that, where they're like, if we put 3 official sounding names, it's the same thing. But they said if we put secret in here 3 times, we sound secret. And so you'd think with her high opinion of herself, that she would be presenting with what she's presenting, you would assume there was verification of something, some sort of like what's the litmus test? Mm-hmm. Like you'd think there would be some way to verify that these people are actually who they say they are. And we'll get into what her litmus test is because she kind of has one.
Who are we talking about?
Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot.
In the notes. So Carrie Cassidy is the founder of Project Camelot?
Along with Bill Ryan, who is now the founder of Project Avalon. They split because of anti-Semitism, and for the life of me, I cannot tell you who is the anti-Semitic one.
Yeah, it's like the degree. Like we had this discussion offline. It's probably over the degrees of how racist you want to be, or what kind of racist you want to be.
I cannot, for the life of me, figure out who is the anti-Semite and who isn't. Like they're both clearly anti-Semites. And instead, on her show, there have been countless hucksters, including the previously mentioned. I don't think I actually did mention him, but
No, you
including
said
this guy.
David
Okay,
Wilcock.
including the previously mentioned David Wilcock, who used her show to promote any conspiracy theory they want, so long as they have a good story. That's what everybody on her show does. They have to have a good story. And what shouldn't be surprising is the immediate attraction white supremacy conspiracy theorists had for the YouTube channel. On top of it all, there are incredibly weird connections they seem to all have together. And the seeming network of conspiracy theorists to grift one another is also an interesting
Echo chamber.
Echo chamber, yeah.
Conspiracy theories.
Well, because you have Carrie Cassidy sort of got popularized by InfoWars. That's sort of how they got their start. So there's also a lot of apparent scandals they face within their own community, and leaves any peering eyes confused, ultimately astonished at the way people think. Like, from neo-Nazis exposing, there was a neo-Nazi who exposed the founders of Project Camelot in a weird open letter on YouTube. I don't know what you want to call that, but basically just going off on how they're actually Jewish or something like that.
God.
There's a lot of weird infighting, and then there's this open letter on WordPress about the Keshe Foundation being a front for a cult. And then my favorite is the weird YouTube video saying Project Camelot is practicing and promoting occultic rituals through their videos. So that's like the Christian fascists there. I don't know.
So we're who funds these people?
Their funding comes from a variety of producers. One of the producers of Chicken Soup for the Soul, the 1999 film.
Yes.
Another from Jesse Ventura Conspiracies.
Of course.
And the weirdest of all is America's Funniest Home Videos. I can't verify if it is true, but I have heard they also receive money through the Falun Gong media producers, who fund another YouTube channel called The Edge of Wonder, which is infamous for its anti-China propaganda.
Yeah, so
I can prove the Edge of Wonder thing.
So talk about Falun Gong, because Falun Gong tends to come up oddly a lot in the QAnon community as well as the conspiracy theory community,
and in the communist,
and in the communist community, in the left communities as well, because they come up a lot. But I think it's important for people to know who they are and their role in promoting this anti-China propaganda.
So Falun Gong is this a Christian organization is what they call themselves, and you'll see a lot of evangelical churches supporting them for some reason. Some of my family is involved in a church, and they raised $30,000 or something for church. I was like, "Are you serious?" And so these people would go on to claim stuff like China was harvesting their organs. What they weren't saying is it was people who murdered people and were in prison who had died, and that when they died, China would say, well, why let a good organ go to waste? There's a shortage of organs to be replacing people's. So, if it works, use it. Which I think kind of is, if we get it down to the morals of it, is it okay? I don't know. I'm an organ donor. I don't really care. So it really just gets down to how you view organ donating, and it's kind of forced. I don't know if they signed a waiver or anything like that, but I know that's sort of where that story comes from. And then they also, they're just this huge anti-China group that believes that every race, every pure race, has its own heaven and God and Jesus and stuff like that. And that mixed people like me won't go to heaven and are actually an abomination. So, Falun Gong isn't the best kind of people, and they certainly aren't the best truth tellers. Mm-hmm. And every time they support something, it's very much linked to Nazis.
Yeah, and they have things that are considered legitimate news sources, like the Epoch Times, right?
Epoch Times, which I just saw a commercial for. And they were actually
all over YouTube.
They did the half-truth thing. They did the half-truth thing in it, where they start presenting something that's oh yeah, you're making some interesting claims that I would want to look into. What do you have to say? And so they actually will grab your attention with some real-sounding news. But ultimately, once you start subscribing to them, you get a lot of weird-ass conclusions.
Yeah, and they're very. I think they're actually banned in China just because they promote like really violent and racist things. Um, but yeah, I think people. I guarantee that probably 90% of YouTube watchers or people who just consume media on a daily basis have been exposed to some kind of
Falun
Falun
Gong
Gong.
media,
Yeah,
honestly. Because
propaganda.
they get all their money through Radio Free Asia, which Biden pushed for in Congress.
Joe Biden.
So Joe Biden's linked to this. What's
Yeah.
up? And so this connection is most obvious with the guests they share, like David Wilcock. I have a
Mhm.
weird obsession with. Earlier, I called him Raw Incarnate, which is due to like a 2007 forum post where he posted his audio talking about that he is Raw reincarnated.
I am Ra. The world of energy that you dance through may be invisible to your physical eyes of the flesh.
Nowadays, he's best friends with Q from the QAnon conspiracy theories.
Allegedly.
And he thinks he's the reincarnation of Edgar Allan Casey, I think is his middle name. But he's I think they called him the sleeping prophet or something like that. So he pretend to sleep.
That's got to be an easy job.
He's so good. So he would just pretend to fucking give out prophecies. And like most of the time they never came true, but he's the reason why people think there's a Nazi base on the moon. So anyway, there you go with that one. The Edge of Wonder, we'll move on to them now, has several series on YouTube of YouTube videos on him. And the New Atheist Era YouTube channel, the Armored Skeptic, has some debunking videos of those videos. And not that I'm going to promote him because he's just very milquetoast, like reactionary, almost conservative, but still kind of liberal, kind of almost, basically a proto-libertarian. So I'm not really going to say go watch it, but he does provide some funny things, I guess, like the raw footage.
The raw
footage. Where he says he's raw reincarnated. I just cannot get over that one. But in one of these videos, David Wilcock claims that the California wildfires were started by a laser beam, which I'm sure we've all seen that conspiracy theory. But it was meant to destroy a town of aliens, of Pleiadians, pretending to be humans with the most incredible dental care. For some reason, he really focuses on the dentistry of the town. I think the absurdity of these theories isn't discrediting these shows, but they allow them to present themselves as a free thought platform in order to promote personal ideas of whomever funds them. So it's not necessarily that these ideas are true to them. And I think when you watch these videos, it's kind of clear that these guys think David Wilcock is out there. But they definitely believe what the Falun Gong and CIA wants them to believe. And that's why they put these guys on there, is that they'll promote these QAnon conspiracy theories and stuff like that. And so we already discussed Falun Gong's connection to the CIA and all of that. But on top of it all, white supremacy and anti-Semitism can be found in every corner of the UFO community, really. And I find a sort of enjoyment from researching these wild subjects just because, I don't know, something in the absurdity thrills me. And finding their obscure connections. And I think it speaks volumes of what the UFO phenomenon has done to the collective psyche of society. Because most people now will tell you that aliens definitely exist. Like, that's a common phrase. And so I thought it would be a good idea to analyze where the phenomenon stems from. And as that is a huge topic on Ancient Aliens, which claims everything from Hindu gods to electricity was actually aliens, I personally believe that UFOs are some sort of psyop designed by the USA, which I've said several times now, which they've openly admitted could be used for defensive and offensive propaganda uses on the CIA website, as well as openly admitting to running gullibility tests on the citizens of the United States. And I think that it is most noticeably seen with Reagan's alien threat speech, where he says if an alien threat were to come, that it would unite the world. But I think it's very useful for propaganda purposes. But what is often left out of that discussion is its use for obfuscation. Okay. and that being to obfuscate America's role in the turmoil of the world, or even Europe's role, essentially Western civilization as a whole role in what makes the world so tumultuous now. Crusades, from colonialism, slavery, left and right. There are so many things that were enacted by Western cultures that now we have to sort of figure out what's going on with today. And rather than actually analyzing the history, the ancient aliens people want to create another way for you to view the world so you don't have to accept that truth. Mm-hmm. And so the idea of space travel is as old as any nation today, pretty much. And cosmic pluralism, like any nation that is still alive today, they somewhere in their history have somebody who wrote something about space travel, usually. That's a big usually and broad stroke, but it's pretty popular. It's going as far back as the 1800s, and so cosmic pluralism is
I like that term.
Cosmic pluralism.
We need cosmic pluralism.
Is represented throughout ancient stories the world over. And what cosmic pluralism is the idea of multiple civilizations in the universe, not just one. And so, however, modern UFO paranoia can be linked most popularly to the Roswell incident.
Which happened here, where I'm calling from.
So Roswell, New Mexico, I'm sure most people have heard of. And there is a reason it raises so many brows, of course. And ultimately, government secrecy has always made people wary of the government's covert actions, especially when you refer to things like Cointelpro or Operation Paperclip, where the government is clearly the bad guys, Yeah,
and let's talk about, just real briefly, Cointelpro was an FBI program that was created specifically by J. Edgar Hoover to crush the Communist Party. And then later on, it went to blackmail civil rights leaders such as Martin Luther King Jr., and then went on to infiltrate and attempted to destroy organizations like the Black Panther Party to discredit and basically turn their own leadership and membership against them in the American public, and then also went on to to have an influence in I guess, disrupting and destabilizing the American Indian movement.
Well put. Couldn't have said it better myself. And so during the 1940s, there were several incidents that are often quoted by ancient aliens, including Roswell, which happened in 1947. One of those was the Battle of Los Angeles in 1942, right when we started against the Japanese. So, of course, it happened in Los Angeles, the largest military base at the time, I think. And many other ideas that I will try to address briefly. But the first thing you will read on Wikipedia about Roswell is the sequence of events was triggered in July 1947 by the crash of a military balloon near Roswell. The balloon had been launched from Alamogordo Army Airfield. A month earlier, it carried a radar reflector and classified Project Mogul sensors for experimental monitoring of the Soviet nuclear testing. And I will be completely honest and say I believe in aliens, sure, but I don't think they visiting Earth in any regular capacity, and skeptically, if at all. Even if they are, I don't think it's to probe buttholes and mutilate cows. That seems a little outlandish. And I especially don't think it's to play a role in U.S. imperialism. Mm-hmm. But instead, I think this public discussion of phenomenal events is meant to cover up the real goals of certain projects of the United States. For example, when the B-52 and many other spy planes were and are being tested, it is very common for UFO sightings to be reported in the same areas. The balloon crashed, and I think it's obvious, even with the official explanation, that the project was probably an anti-Soviet mission of some kind and was most likely sabotaged by one of the many scientists aiding the Soviet Union against America's nuclear aggression and monopoly. If you all aren't aware of the former Pros Round Table, they did an amazing episode on nuclear history and the hidden heroes who helped the Soviet Union get nuclear bombs to deter the U.S. from global dominance. And I'm willing to take an educated guess and say one of these heroes was aiding the Soviet Union once again. And the U.S. used the term flying saucer to hide the real nature of the craft from the public eye due to the U.S. plans for the post-war world. Arguably, we can say that the Cold War began when the Bolsheviks took power, and Roswell is the perfect example of how quickly the U.S. was willing to forget the Red Army's contribution to the survival of humanity.
Yeah, just to interject real quickly, um, New Mexico, for those of you who are listening, is where the nuclear bomb was first invented in the Manhattan Project that happened at Los Alamos National Labs. We're going to do an entire episode on it, the history of it, like from an indigenous perspective, specifically from the Tewa people whose sacred site this is, right? And it's no coincidence that the UFO phenomenon, originates in a place like New Mexico, because New Mexico itself is a conspiracy theory. Jeffrey Epstein had a ranch here. The Church of Scientology has its archives buried in a place in New Mexico. There's a lot of military bases here, and there's a lot of New Mexico is also like the second poorest state in the nation. A lot of people don't even like when I travel with my New Mexico driver's license. People think that I'm actually Mexican. So no, because it says they don't think that, it's just like it's not thought of as a place that like is part of the United States, and it's a majority minority state. So there's there's a lot like New Mexico itself is a conspiracy theory. What's that?
You're telling me that there are Americans out there who think
TSA agents.
TSA agents who think New Mexico isn't a state.
Yes. They're like, is this a state? And I was like, yeah. Like, New Mexico as part of Mexico? That doesn't even make any sense.
It really hurts my brain. It really hurts my brain. But operating from the idea that all the photos released from Roswell were fake. Okay. For all we know, that this was a poorly designed nuclear bomb that accidentally dropped, similar to an incident near Goldsboro, North Carolina, where a B-52 dropped a nuke that luckily did not explode. It's interesting that the rancher stored the disc for a while. I think it was about a week before the Air Force was able to recover it. And with the claims of bodies found, I don't think it was the rancher who said that, but I think other people did. And I think if there was bodies found, there would be a cover up that a pilot died in the B-52 crash. Mm-hmm. But whether that's true or not, I'm just saying I'm offering an alternative conspiracy theory. And I find it extremely likely that the U.S. is incompetent in building expensive planes. Like whenever they build an expensive plane, it really is not good. So, for example, the F-35 can't fly in the rain. And it's something like 1 in 9 pilots will get decapitated if they weigh under 135 pounds and eject. Wow. It's a decapitation machine, a $1.5 trillion decapitation machine that can't fly in the rain.
We need one of those for billionaires.
That's the new guillotine, the F-35.
Ejection seats.
It's too good. So anyway, I find it extremely. So I just think it's very plausible that the B-52 could have crashed. Yada yada yada. Whatever.
Well, yeah. I mean, just to let people know, like this was like a lot of people in New Mexico didn't know this was happening, right? They would fly things and then they would, it's no wonder the UFO conspiracy comes out of here because there are military bases, there are multiple military bases, there are bombing ranges. There's all kinds of things. And, I have a friend who he's Guatemalan. He came up here and he was like freaked out because of all the random flying objects you would find. Like they still run like large scale military training exercises because the landscape here is very similar to that of Afghanistan. And so in the middle of the night, you'll see like a trail of like Black Hawk helicopters, just like, yeah, it's wild. Yeah. And we live.
Well, anytime I see military helicopters flying through the air in like Detroit and stuff, I immediately go, what the hell are they doing?
Yeah. Well, we live like right by the air, or we live under the flight path of the air, the military base. And I know this because my brother-in-law brought his drone over, and drones have like, they're like a pre-programmed thing where they can't fly in like certain areas, and we can't actually fly a drone in our house because it's considered like a military like
airspace.
Like airspace or whatever. So that's how I know. So every morning we wake up to military jets, all kinds of things flying over our house.
So I was wrong about the 1 in 9. It's 98% of pilots under 135 pounds.
So even better odds for the billionaires.
Literally, I mean, we just had to starve them a bit. But so in order to avoid public outrage, they probably fabricate these alien body claims and the UFO story as a means to manipulate the public. And so if they can make up a barely supported conspiracies, I will. And, if ancient aliens can make up barely supported conspiracy theories, I will. And they will be more realistic of the government's real nature. So the Battle of Los Angeles is a similar incident with which the U.S. military fires hundreds of rounds into the air in L.A. And in 1942 is the peak of anti-Japanese paranoia. An ancient alien is often shown with a known altered photo. Okay, they know they altered the photo with increased exposure, where the lights coalesce that makes it appear like there might be a UFO. And maybe there could have been a spy plane or something, and maybe even a UFO. But the more likely scenario is a false flag, to sound like Alex Jones. Let me put on my Alex Jones voice. A false flag, or a weather balloon spooking. A weather balloon
spooking
green soldiers. What was I even trying to say there?
The notes are lying.
Like. A weather balloon spooking new soldiers, like green soldiers, spring soldiers, whatever you want to call them. It was new people to a war that we weren't involved with, and we had just started making our military advanced at this time. So, more advanced, I should say. We weren't very much an imperial power until after World War I and II. And that's when we really started having global dominance of the world, because we have the nuke and Truman walking into negotiations going, you're going to listen to me because I have the nukes. So I will admit I didn't do the most thorough research, but I read a lot of Wikipedia, viewed their sources. So we're offered, a lot of times they don't offer a source. So from Project Camelot and Ancient Aliens, also with their sources, I more than encourage people to research it themselves, just because it's all fake. It's obviously fake. So I'm not really too concerned with proving that these people said it, but they did say it, and you could go watch it yourself. All the links will be in the show notes. But Ancient Aliens and YouTube channels like Project Camelot and Edge of Wonder worry me, and that's why I obsessively watch and debunk them for fun. They live in a nonsensical fantasy world with such a complex lore that barely goes skin deep.
I don't know if you have any closing thoughts on this.
No, I thought this was a great time to wrap up. I feel like we've delved into every conspiracy theory.
We've hit everything, and there's so many threads and rabbit holes to fall down, to go down and to follow. That I think this is a good episode to start with, and I think we're gonna probably return to a lot of these themes. I think we actually need to do another episode on MK Ultra and Cointelpro, because the idea of conspiracy, it's not just about how governments and these clandestine operations are used to disrupt social movements, but it's also to convince social movements that they themselves have been infiltrated and therefore are being through puppet strings being manipulated by intelligence services, and they don't Cointelpro is no longer operational, right? Neither is Operation Chaos, but nonetheless, these programs didn't just shut down and the FBI or the CIA started doing different things. They just evolved into other programs, and we may never know, or we may know in sometime in the future with declassified documents, the full extent and consequences of these kinds of programs. But I would say that you are correct, or you're at least onto something when you do say that this is part of a larger kind of propaganda operation to discredit not only indigenous claims, but to discredit, views or theories that the government is creating, weapons or doing certain things that, especially within the conspiracy theory community, to promote certain things that are just operating under the cover of conspiracies, but at the heart of it are white supremacist, pseudo-fascist doctrines.
Exactly. So with that, I just this wealth of information I stumbled upon by liking Ancient Aliens when I was forever years old. Is why I don't know. How did we even get onto we should do this collab?
Yeah.
I don't even know how we got here.
But we're going to continue going down this path. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next
I'd like to
time.
plug one thing.
Okay.
One thing. Our Ways Always is a zine being. I don't really know what zine is.
Zine.
But zine? Okay. So first off, I'm pronouncing it wrong. Secondly, it's a fundraiser, like you buy art, right? Is that what it is?
Yeah.
I think you buy art and it goes to a specific thing, and it's going to Unistaten. Unistaten?
Yeah.
God, I pronounce everything wrong. Unistaten camp. And they did discuss it with them, and all that money is going towards them, and it's organized by my co-host Huns, and they're I don't know who else was involved. But it's more of like a liberal thing. So you should give money to them though, because the camp needs help and needs money, and I think they're also going to try to organize one for the bail fund, the Black Hills Legal.
Oh yeah.
I can't think of the actual name. But yeah, so that's all that's in the works. So follow them on Twitter or something, and also try to help them out or promote them something. But that would be cool. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you for having me on.